name is Dave Bainline. I'm a permaculture designer and educator. I am co-author of the book Practical Permaculture, and I am one of the founders of Rooted Northwest. At its heart, Rooted Northwest is a project seeking to preserve agricultural land. And we're looking at a novel way of doing that. And part of the way that we're going to preserve that agricultural land is through a residential component. So 3 parts to the project. We will preserve ag land. We will create a residential opportunity so farmers can live on the land that they're working at. And then we will also have an educational aspect to this, because I imagine in this whole grand adventure, we're going to learn a lot and be able to pass that on to other folks. The residential component here at Rooted Northwest will be based on the co-housing model, which comes from Denmark. And it is essentially, in a nutshell, a way of creating a residential community that enhances opportunities for chance encounters and interaction. We'll have a common house. We'll be largely based off a walkable model. So you will walk out of your home, you will head to the common house for a shared meal or to get your mail. You'll probably run into other people. You'll say hi. Maybe you'll get roped into a game of cribbage. And all that's just, coming home from work on the way back to your house from your car. So we're trying to share resources, have a lighter footprint, and have a more lively and active community life. We're adding this other component, right? And we're kind of coining the term agri-village for what we're doing, where there are many other co-housing communities out there, but what we're looking to do is have a real focus on farming. Like, can we create a co-housing neighborhood for farmers and people who are supporters of farming? So one big difference between many other co-housing communities and what we're doing is we're very much rural and we're sitting on large acreage, because we want people to be able to live here, have all the support and all that community interaction that's so critical or so fundamental to the co-housing concept, yet also be able to practice agriculture on the broader acreage and have access to land. There's a few major inspirations for this project. We started out by going out in the world and trying to look at all the precedents that we could, because we figure reinventing the wheel is not a great use of time. For the residential component, we visited Eco-Village Ithaca in upstate New York, as well as a bunch of other communities. But Eco-Village Ithaca really resonated with us, especially their first neighborhood, the Frog neighborhood. And so we largely are thinking about our residential component based on what we saw at Eco-Village Ithaca. For the farming component, we went and visited a project I had worked on in the past called Our Table Cooperative, just outside Portland, Oregon. And they have many different components: market stand, multiple people coming together and farming on a piece of large acreage. And so we're learning from what they did in order to see how that might look here. And then Occidental Arts and Ecology Center in Northern California is a place we went to look at how do people successfully integrate land-based education into a residential community in a way that doesn't make people feel like they're living in the fishbowl, and that provides more benefits for residents than it taxes them. And then we also checked out, I guess I spent 7 years living at the Bullock's Permaculture Homestead out on Orcas Island. So in terms of sort of a good example of rural living and growing your own food and doing things at sort of a home scale, which I imagine we'll see a lot of within our neighborhood clusters. So those are our big inspirations. We're looking to build Rooted Northwest for a number of different reasons, and some of them are actually really simple. When I lived at the Bullock's Permaculture Homestead for 7 years, one of the critical things that I got from that experience was this sense of easy community and easy interaction, right? We had a whole crew of people, 12 interns, and I would eat 3 meals a day with 12 interns. And we had a shared kitchen and we had a shared hangout space, and then everybody had their own dwelling unit that they went back to at the end of the day. And this worked really well. And what I know is that it was really easy to just say, hey, after dinner, who wants to do something? Who wants to go for a hike tomorrow? Who wants to do all these things? Whereas I find in a more modern context, not more modern, within the context of the way many people live, outside that farm, it's really hard to find time to get together with people. So I wanted an opportunity to both have people who are interested in similar projects in one space so you can collaborate. And during the day when you're working, you've got good people to work on similar projects who are values aligned near you. And then when you're not working, instead of having to plan a month ahead to like play a board game with someone or something like that, we can just have that happen spontaneously, right? That can just be something that comes up because we're going to be eating dinner in the same building anyway, or we're going to walk past each other's houses anyway, and we can just knock on the door. I think it's also going to offer some real benefits for families. It's like having 30 aunts and uncles around. And I think it's just going to be a much more vibrant way to live for me. And I feel like that's something that probably resonates with a lot of other people as well. So I think one of the big perks of doing this instead of, I'm going to go buy my own 5 acres and start a farm. First of all, we have a huge obstacle there. If you did not grow up in a farming family and have the farm land, equipment, business model, and everything else handed to you when you came of age, how do you actually get into farming, right? Like, you have to buy the land, you have to buy all the equipment, you have to launch the enterprises, and none of that, gets rid of any of the other things that everybody else has to do as well, like get clothes for your kids and send them to school and save for a college fund and pay your insurance and, fix the roof and all those other things. So it becomes this huge obstacle for young people who want to get into agriculture. And it's really mind-boggling because we have this huge obstacle that is in front of young people trying to get into agriculture. And then on the other end, we look at the average age of a farmer in the US is pushing up towards 60. Like, that's average. That means half of them are older than that, right? So how do we make this transition? And I think a big part of this project is looking for ways to make that transition and to also explore ways that for a farmer to get involved, to get started, to get into this, how do we make it something that's not extractive or exploitive, right? Because I think your average farmer is working like 60 plus hours a week, 7 days a week. There is no vacation. I mean, how many farmers end up burning out, right? Like, it's a lifestyle thing. And we know that in most cases, farmers aren't compensated as well as people who have other roles in society. So if we approach this at a community scale, are there ways that we can make this work better for farmers, right? Can we set up something so farmers work sane hours and get to spend time with their kids? Can we set things up so that there are other community members who are actively supporting those farmers to make that living and to do what they're trying to do? The vision for Rooted Northwest is that we create this community of people who are partnering around agriculture. The most important thing that we want to have people aligned on is a set of values that we believe in. And those values include things like pursuing a life of meaningful work. We are looking at autonomy with shared responsibility because we want to make sure people have this sort of freedom to live the life that they're looking to live, but not at the expense of everyone else who lives around you, right? We want to demonstrate that we really value diversity in all its different permutations, and we definitely want to look at ways that we can get rid of obstacles there. We're interested in participatory democratic governance. In other words, nobody's going to be the overlord telling you what to do, right? Dave, who is one of the founders, is not looking to be the leader who tells everyone else how this is going to work. Everyone gets to have a say in how this is going to work. And then ecological land stewardship is another key component. And so if people are on board with those sets of values and what's behind them and what we're talking about there, this is probably going to be a pretty good match of a project because those values essentially formulate the vision of how agriculture will work here and how we'll have a whole community of people supporting agriculture and really getting behind our farmers to make sure that they're successful. The land we found is 240 acres. Sometimes we call it the unicorn because if you ever look at like people talking about real estate, they're like, set out all your criteria. And then if you can hit 60%, you're doing pretty good. And we hit way more than that. So we're on 240 acres. This is a former dairy farm and it's been farmed for many years. We have fairly rich soils that have had, cow manure has been a huge part of the fertility program here for many, many years. So the soils are rich, good drainage, minimal compaction. We have a lot of flat land. We have access to irrigation water and lots of sun. All in all, I would say this is a pretty good place to come. I would say many farmers would look at this and say, this seems like a really good place to do farming. We are in Snohomish County, just outside the city of Arlington. So we're about equal distance from Seattle and Bellingham. It's about an hour to either of those. Within the 240 acres of land we have, there are several barns left over from the old dairy, and some of them are in good shape. So we would be able to save a portion of those buildings and repurpose them, make workshops and studio spaces and storage and things like that. In addition to that infrastructure, we have several ponds on the land. And then I would say probably somewhere in the ballpark of 125 acres or so are in fields. Currently, right now, today, those are hay fields. And those, I'm hoping, will evolve into more of a mosaic of different land uses that reflect the values and vision of the farmers who come to the project. The remainder of the land, I should say a good portion of the remainder of the land is in forest. We have a lot of cedar and some Doug fir, and that is kind of what goes around a lot of edges of the property. One of our boundaries is a perennial stream. It's fairly small, but still something that we are eager to have nearby and to protect. This is an incredible, incredible piece of planet Earth. And we'd love to see it continue on in its legacy as a productive farm. And at the end of the day, it seems like a really great place to live. Even though this 240 acres of land is in agriculture, clearly, by land use, it's agriculture and forestry here, it's actually zoned residential. And that was a big part of why we got involved with this particular property, is because it was at risk of development. And if left to its own devices, it is likely that this land would have been purchased by a developer eventually, and they would have built 5-acre lots with big homes on them. And that's like the model. That's what the zoning allows for here. So that's why we got in between that process, and we purchased this property before it was on the market in order to try and save the farmland. And our goal right now, our aim, is to preserve 92% of the farmland and really have very tiny envelopes where the residential components happen. And we're even trying to skew those so they're on the edges or on land that's less optimal for farming. So what this land will look like in 10 years is going to be completely driven by who shows up to farm it. I have been very adamant that I am not going to try to force somebody to farm a specific crop in a specific location in the way that I think is right. We have overarching values around how agriculture will happen here. And if people are in line with those overarching values, we're trying to offer opportunities for people to make decisions about how they're going to run their enterprises. That said, what I would love to see is all the different hallmarks of regenerative agriculture on this land. I would love to see, where we have livestock, I would like to see holistic planned grazing or other managed grazing approaches that do a good job of approximating what we see in wild herds of animals and have those similar ecological impacts in a positive way on the landscape. When we start to look at other systems, I would love to see a good portion of this land shift towards perennial cropping systems. And hopefully, that moves us more towards a minimal or no tillage type of system. Agroforestry is a component that I'm really excited to see implemented here, because as we can start to do different tree crop systems, whether that be silvopasture, where we're raising trees and livestock together, whether that be alley cropping, where we're doing row crops in between rows of trees and getting multiple harvests out of those areas. We could be doing forest farming, which is a technique where you're going into some of the forested edges around the property and you have products that you can generate there while still maintaining a canopy of forest, which is good for wildlife and is good for the ecology and everything else. And annual vegetables, where we do annuals, can we be doing those in a way that is really very much so focused on soil stewardship, as opposed to just how can we max out the vegetables? It's how can we max out the vegetables while also supporting pest predator insects, pollinators, and keeping our soils healthy, minimizing erosion. So minimal and low tillage systems, again, are a way to do that. And then integrating all kinds of other things that people are excited about experimenting with in the world of regenerative agriculture, which could include, room to experiment with techniques like biochar and really managing what we call the soil food web. Those are ways that we could approach looking at fertility management on this acreage as we go forward. And then if you tie that into sustainable water usage and how can we use conservation-oriented methods to deliver water to crops, looking at dry farming options, it really goes in any number of directions. And so when I look out over this landscape that surrounds us, I think about seeing a mosaic of those different things. And so while you might have highland cows moving through some ponderosa pines that are planted in one area, right next to that, maybe there's a vegetable operation that's being done no-till style. And maybe right next to that, somebody's doing blueberries. And maybe the blueberry grower is having the person with the chicken egg operation, they run their chickens through the blueberries at the end of the season in order to clean up any fallen fruit, to prevent disease and to get the chickens fed and to fertilize the blueberries all at once. So these are the kinds of things that we can look at in terms of ways of getting these works done in a way that kind of meshes with ecology rather than ignores it. When people are considering doing an enterprise here at Rooted Northwest, there's a couple things that I think are important to know in terms of how that would play out. The first one is this is not a sharecropping scheme, right? If you are here and you're farming, you do not owe a percentage of your harvest or a percentage of your profits from your harvest to the community. That's not how this works. I'm pretty adamant that the community is here to support farmers, and that's the primary thing. You are not mandated to supply 25 heads of broccoli to the common house to make a common house dinner. If you are going to do so, I think that's wonderful, and the community would pay you your fair price for those things. Because again, we want to support farmers. We're trying to create a system that values the work that farmers do. That said, on the other side, if you farm here, one of the big benefits that you might encounter is you have a very supportive group of people very close by who will probably buy your produce, right? It seems like that would be a no-brainer for selling it very locally. You can walk a basket over to someone's house instead of loading it all onto a truck. That said, of course, there'll be sales out into the broader community, and our proximity to Seattle means both Seattle and Bellingham and everything in between. I think there's a lot of room for markets in this area. If you're coming out here and you're going to start an ag enterprise, there are different levels of sort of decision making and responsibility that you'll find yourself in, right? And there's sort of a broad base that all farmers here will have to get on board. And it's really sort of the beginning point. It's the starting point for you to look at and figure out if this is right for you, right? And that's the Rooted Northwest, the whole project on the whole, has already made a handful of decisions. One of those decisions is that we're doing regenerative agriculture, right? We're going to be trying to do things that meet organic standards. So that way, if we want to pursue organic standards for part of this property, if you choose to spray, you can't ruin the organic standards for other people and for future people who want to use that land. If you're on board with that sort of approach at a baseline, that's the example of what we're talking about being sort of decided at the big Rooted Northwest level. Something else that would fall at the Rooted Northwest level in terms of decision making would be your business has to be legal, right? You're raising crops that are legal. You've got your business put together in a way that's legal. You're not exploiting workers or that sort of thing. As long as you're within those bounds, you're good to go. We have decided as a community that commercial marijuana growing is not something we want to do. That would be one of the other big, sort of pre-decided items you would have to sign on for. And because it always gets into the weeds with the conversation, if you wanted to do hemp, that's open. If you wanted to do CBD, that's open. As we continue to look into other aspects of the farming enterprises, we move up a level, right? And then there are decisions that would be made by what we refer to as the Ag Circle, which is essentially our committee of people who are, number one, involved in agriculture, and number two, making decisions one level down from there, or one level up, depending how you want to look at it. If you're wondering, I need 5 acres, which 5 acres would I get? That would be a discussion that would happen in the Ag Circle, of which you as a farmer can be a part, right? And that discussion would happen there. If you are interested in building a structure, that would be something that you would bring and talk to the Ag Circle about, especially if it was going to have bigger impacts for someone else. If you wanted to put in a road to your area, that would be an Ag Circle discussion. And so what we're trying to do is make sure the Ag Circle represents farmers. If somebody doesn't know anything about agriculture and doesn't have any involvement with agriculture, but they live at Rooted Northwest, they would not be on the Ag Circle. We're trying to make sure farmers are making decisions for what works within the farming community on the property. Well, those are kind of examples of things that would be decided at the ag circle level. And what we're hoping is the biggest panorama of things that would be things that would be decided by you. Hiring and firing employees, what kind of harrow do you want to get? You know, all of those decisions are up to you. Do you want to build a tool shed? Do you want to put internal paths within the area that you're doing? Or do you want to lay your beds out this way or this way? Do you know, how do you want to run your operation is very much up to you. Do you want to primarily focus on restaurant sales? Do you want to be doing wholesaling? What is your means of vectoring out your materials? If you want to use Rooted Northwest branding, then we step back up to one of those other levels and you'd have to meet certain criteria. If you want to run your own business, have your own branding, and have the people who buy your produce have no idea you're here or you're involved with Rooted Northwest, that's your decision. If you're bringing an existing farm in and you've already invested a ton in your marketing, that's fine. You're not forced to claim the Rooted Northwest name as you do your thing, but you might want to. We think there'll probably be benefits from that. If you want to sell your stuff in our market stand, and so on and so forth, there's ways to make things work really well. That kind of gives you a sense as to how this decision making flows. And really, most of the decisions are yours, and then there's this intermediate step of the ag circle where decisions that affect others happen, and then there's one overarching sort of umbrella layer of the basics that you would already know about before you ever got involved at Rooted. We are keenly aware that in North American society, farmers don't tend to be fabulously wealthy with cash resources just laying around in big piles. Therefore, buying a house, jumping on board a project here, or even if you went and bought your own property and tried to launch a farm, there is a significant financial obstacle to making that happen. And so here at Rooted Northwest, we believe that we would like to see a financial investment to help with that situation. And so we have a couple things that we've already done. One thing, we've flagged $200,000 for ag infrastructure improvements. That would involve, depending what kinds of things people need, we could start to improve things. Some of the existing sheds that are here on the property could get upgraded to provide a specific use. Let's say a packing shed, or let's say veggie washing or something like that. We can invest in making those things happen. We can invest in getting a reasonable irrigation system set up. We could invest in a tractor. We already bought a tractor that is here for the community to utilize. That's one level of investment in agriculture. And then the other thing we've done is an effort to help individual farming families have a chance at getting on board. And so we have $400,000 that we have flagged as agriculture, basically startup help funds, right? So in other words, knocking money off the price of a home here in order to make it more possible for someone to join up. And in terms of that money, let's say you received $50,000 of agriculture discounts. So you just knock $50,000 off the price of your home. If for some reason things don't work out, or you have to move for unforeseen circumstances or something like that, people are always curious, well, do I have to pay that money back? And the answer would be, if you've been here, you've operated for several years on the property, no. Because what we're attempting to do is we're attempting to demonstrate that there is more than one valuable way to contribute in terms of equity to this project. And soil stewardship and establishment of regenerative ag systems is one of those. If it doesn't work out for whatever reason and you've got to move on, you don't have to pay that back. That's the intent. We see lots of different people participating in agriculture here at Rooted Northwest. And that ranges from people who would like to be involved in a little community garden next to the common house. And that's great, right? And they want to be able to raise some food for their own use or for consumption in the common house. And we might expand out from there and have people who then are interested in doing something larger, but still more focused on themselves. Like maybe they want an acre, and on that acre, they plan to grow potatoes, and they plan to grow lots of veggies and some overwintering salad greens and have a little orchard, and it's largely to provide for their needs so that they don't really ever go to the grocery store throughout the year. Totally welcome here as well. And as we scale up from there, we start to get into the people who have a livelihood based on farming. We have people who are like, I am growing crops in order to send them out to people who need food, and I want to be participating in providing healthy food that helps move the needle on food security in Western Washington, right? And I plan to derive at least part of my livelihood from that system. Those are the people we're focused on for agriculture discounts. Anybody's welcome to garden here. Anybody's welcome to do small-scale homesteader-style farming here. But the people we're focused on for trying to assist them is the people who are trying to make a livelihood of farming, because those are the people we really want to support. Those are the people who need our support the most, because they're not getting much for support from other ends, right? And especially when we start to think about financials and discounts, that's where we're focusing our energy. The people who fall into that corner, into that category, could have many different sort of ways that they're doing it as well. It could be an individual who's running their own enterprise solo and sharing resources with other farmers and other people in the project in sort of ad hoc ways. It could be people who are very much so interested in banding together with other farmers and mutually running some sort of enterprise, or even potentially mutually running a very sizable enterprise. Imagine if we had 5 community members get together and launch a farming cooperative and take on the stewardship of 50 or 60 acres here at Rooted Northwest and do multiple different kinds of enterprises within that band. And you know what? They might even be joined by people who don't live at Rooted Northwest. So we're also looking at having people who don't live here be able to be involved in a cooperative like that, right? So they might have 5 people who are resident members of that cooperative, and then 5 people who are non-resident members from the local community that are all sharing the same values and all working towards the same goal. And beyond that, we might have people who, at the end of the day, they don't live here, they lease land and they live somewhere else. Or even further, maybe there's somebody who does live here, but not as an owner. They rent something here, and then they have access to some portion of the ag land, right? These would all be people who can participate in the agriculture community. But the ones that we're really focusing the ag discounts on are the residents who live here, who are seeking to make some portion of their livelihood from agriculture. So if you're interested in getting involved, I would suggest signing up for one of our online info sessions. You can find out when the next one is scheduled on our website, and that would be a great entry point. From there, chances are you'll want to become an explorer, which gives you a chance to feel us out and feel out what we're doing, and you can attend meetings where we're discussing ag policy. You can get the latest updates. You can have access to all our information. We're very much so about transparency. At the end of 10 weeks to 4 months, you and the community will make a decision about membership. And if you decide to pursue membership, that's when you'll start to contribute financially to the project. And you will also at that point have access to all of our design workshops. You'll get to be a participant, and you'll have a decision-making say in what happens here.